Hello and welcome to the Communicating During the Pandemic Breakout session. This session is part of the VACO pre-conference menu. I'm Gage Harder with VACO, and we're grateful and excited to have three local government leaders with us today who will share how they communicated with their communities, constituents, and staff during the past 7-8 months. Joining us are Jeff McKay, Chairman of Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, William McCarty, member of the Isle of Wight County Board of Supervisors, and Dr. Joseph Casey, Chesterfield County Administrator. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. We look forward to hearing about your experiences. But before I turn it over to Chairman McKay, I'd like to say a few words about what happened here at VACO during this unprecedented time. It was Tuesday, March 17th, when VACO Executive Director Dean Lynch told the staff that we would begin working from home. For many on staff, this was a time of confusion, fear, and shock. The next 2 days were spent adjusting, setting up workspaces, making sure we had necessary technology, and figuring out how to apply our work responsibilities to the current circumstances. When we were settled, it quickly dawned on us that we needed to maintain speed with the business of VACO while adjusting to our new temporary work environment. It meant we needed to find ways to stay connected with each other as well with members of our members while social distancing. It took some innovation, trial and error, and on-the-job training, but we managed to use available technology to stay connected. We were able to communicate with our members regularly and conduct business and hold meetings. We have discovered that we miss the in-person world of seeing our members and interacting with them, but we also recognize the potential and efficiency of the virtual world. One endeavor that proved to be successful, however, was not rooted in technology. We went old school by starting a letter writing campaign to legislators with VACO positions and thoughts on proffered legislation. We copied the VACO Board of Directors and county administrators on all letters, which kept them informed about the strategies we use to impact legislation. Many of our board members had not been privy to backroom lobbying, but with these letters, the VACO Board of Directors and county administrators were able to have an active role in strategy discussions on legislation. Chairman McKay, please share with us your story, what you've done to stay connected with the Fairfax County community, and what you've learned during this experience. And I'm going to share my screen now, Chairman McKay, and put up your presentation here. And let's go full screen. And the floor is yours, Chairman McKay.
Thank you very much, Gage, and thank you for everything that you're doing at VACO. It's a pleasure to be with some friends today. And one of the things that has changed in my life is in front of you, you have a PowerPoint presentation which I have lived my entire life trying to discourage people from using. But because we're in this virtual world, I thought it might be a helpful tool since we're not in person to help people see some of the things that we've been working on during this really challenging time. And with that, if you can flip to the first page here. Some of the early challenges that I knew we faced in the county was frankly the size of the county. How do you reach over 1.2 million people? It's a pretty impossible mission as a starting point. And of course, during this pandemic, everything about this has been rapidly changing. I used to think rapidly changing was a change from day to day. We've been seeing a change really from minute to minute since this began, and it's very difficult always to make sure when things are moving that quickly that you're providing good information to folks. And so those were kind of really our early challenges way back in March when we began communicating. Some considerations that we gave ourselves at the beginning of this was that we wanted to be regularly communicating and consistent so that people had an expectation that it's a certain period of time during the day or a certain day of the week, I should be hearing something from the chairman's office. We, of course, wanted to be thorough, but we also realized that people's attention spans are never as long sometimes as we'd like to think they are. And so we wanted to make sure we were thorough, but that we were also not oversharing information. We wanted to clearly convey a few messages, high-level messages to our population. One clearly was that in times of crisis, we are blessed with stable leadership in the county, and that while there's uncertainty and this is a scary situation for so many people, we wanted clearly to share with our constituents that from a county level, We had this pandemic and many of the things that have come up since the pandemic under control. The tools that we used to communicate with people primarily are there before you. We use a newsletter with a constant contact platform that's been very successful. Clearly a website, and really we maximize social media, Facebook and Twitter in particular, to be able to communicate these messages out. And obviously in today's world, if you're going to be a successful communicator, you really have to hit all of these platforms. I mentioned earlier the 1.2 million people, and not all 1.2 million of those people use any one of these things. And so the broader you can be, the more you can reach people, the more consistent and successful your message is going to be. So we used all of these communication tools. Some information about our newsletter. This was our primary communication tool. And the reason for that is because of the amount of content that we had to get out there and share with folks. In March, we had 19,000 people who voluntarily subscribed. We've grown several thousand between now and where we are today. We've grown this by several thousand subscribers. And, you know, one way to measure whether your communications are successful or not, of course, is to look at the open rates. And you can see from that graph what those open rates are. And those are people who are getting the newsletter who aren't just deleting it, but clicking on it to actually read it. One quick success in the first month of the pandemic, we received about 1,000 new subscribers. So you see on the left side of this chart how quickly the subscriptions grew when people needed information the most. And this, of course, was at the very beginning when there was a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty, what was going on in the world. And that's where we saw the largest part of our growth. And, you know, our newsletter also, while it, you know, looks like, you know, we're at 21,000 people, it goes many other places. People take this and they forward it to other friends. We hear comments back from people who aren't on our subscription list. We will get quoted in the media for things that are said on this newsletter, even though we never even discuss them with the media. So the reach of this is far wider than the number of newsletter subscribers. And it's a very easy tool for someone to just hit forward and send to someone else. And so it was useful for that. It was also successful because the content was always decided, because of the frequency of this, was always decided on what was newsworthy based on feedback from residents. People liked getting this newsletter because they could hit reply and quickly send something right back to us. And so we constantly evolved it based on, you know, what we were hearing from folks and how they were responding back to us. And we did get a lot of early input on that was helpful. You know, I think there's some things that, you know, we need to always remember about keeping things clear and concise. There's no real magic to that, but there are some things that, you know, are useful for us to think about. And one of the things we did from the beginning of this is we took data from multiple different places that was reliable and dependable, and we just embedded it into our newsletter. So a lot of the content that's in here wasn't original content we were creating, but as you can see, there are a lot of links to other places where people could go to get more information. So instead of telling the whole story on a particular subject, we put a teaser out there. And for those people who were particularly interested in that subject, we always had a link out there that they could click on. Many times it would take you to another county webpage, but sometimes it would take you outside of the county altogether. And that was a way for us to keep things clear and concise, but also have enough linkages there for people who wanted to be an expert in a particular subject and find out more. I mentioned earlier, the newsletter's evolved in content. It's also evolved in terms of frequency. When COVID first hit, we were sending this out every single day, which was very labor intensive, but appreciated by people. And as time has gone on, we deviated from that. We went down to every other day. Then we went down to a couple times a week. And we've also evolved it beyond just COVID information. We put in there other important things that are happening in the county since we now have this audience. We've all heard of COVID fatigue, and so we wanted to make sure we were putting other interesting content in there for people who might want to know something unrelated to COVID. You know, what's going on in other parts of the county, and what other things is the board working on. And so we constantly tried to, make sure we were giving people what they needed to hear, but not too much information where they felt like they were being overloaded. And a lot of folks have complimented us on walking that fine line. The other thing I wanted to mention is, and I mentioned this earlier about people hitting forward and sending this other places. We're not publishing this for the 21,000 people that subscribe to it. We're publishing it for those people, but also all those people who forward this to their homeowners association, their civic association. We've seen some cases where they've taken this content and then put it out to their neighborhood, which has expanded our reach dramatically. We've even seen some of this content shared on platforms like Nextdoor that we really don't even monitor or get too heavily involved in, but we know that the content from this newsletter attributed to our office is finding its way onto places like Nextdoor by no action of our own. And so you really can expand your reach. With regard to the website, we set up a COVID page in the county right out of the gates so that everybody could go to one page and find out everything that they wanted to find out about COVID. We followed the success of our newsletter and realized that you couldn't endlessly repeat resources, but you had to acknowledge that some people need access to information more than once. And so we wanted to make sure whatever we had in our newsletters was consistent in language and to a certain extent in design with the website, so that people felt like they didn't feel like it, they literally were getting the exact same information. And this is part of the, many voices, same message mentality, where, your messaging has to be consistent. People have to hear it many times in the exact same way before it really sinks into them. And so, again, you can see on here our similar concept was short, accessible, easy to find what you need. With regard to social media, this tool was one that has been so darn important to us during this process. And again, it doesn't take a lot of time and energy to do social media, but your reach can be real wide. We use Facebook. Obviously, we regularly share information on that. The beauty of Facebook is that you really can share anything. It wasn't like we were going only after a COVID audience. We really wanted to make sure that we use that platform as broadly as we can. But it really was not a big focus of ours with the COVID stuff, because Facebook can quickly be overtaken. It's not always the timeliest way to communicate. We found actually using Twitter to be even better than Facebook. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it was surprising to me the impact that Twitter had, how much further your information goes. Like the newsletter format, though, we continue to focus on concise statements that kind of cuts through the weeds for people. It was a good place also to answer residents' questions. Just as an example, I did a live Twitter Q&A all the way back in April. And when we did that, we had 72,500 total impressions, which is really unbelievable. And it was just a live Twitter feed where people were putting questions in, we were answering them, and it really worked out really well. And in a normal month, we get about 100,000 total impressions for the whole month, which is still a lot of impressions. But obviously, just looking at that one Twitter Q&A, getting 75,000 on one event just shows you the reach of Twitter and what an effective tool it has been for us. And, the other thing is, for us elected officials, social media sometimes allows you to maybe address a particularly sensitive political issue that you wouldn't want to put in a newsletter that might, appear like it's only an official county document. And so we're always careful about that, but sometimes, as an example, with some of the police issues that have come up, we'll touch on those in our newsletter, but sometimes we might find that putting it out on Twitter might get some better feedback about a really sensitive topic. And so depending on what the issue is, we kind of pick the platform, but again, try to stay as consistent as we possibly can. One of the other challenges besides our size of 1.2 million was obviously we have a very diverse community. I don't think that's dissimilar from many areas of Virginia. And we realized that my office couldn't tackle all this communication by ourselves. I mean, I have a diverse staff, but with hundreds of languages spoken in the county, there's no way that we could have tailored everything to meet all of those needs. And so we did direct our Office of Public Affairs back in March to significantly focus efforts on translating. Instead of relying on Google Translate, which, for many years I did mistakenly, and now I realize that Google Translate, the accuracy of that in something like a pandemic can really work against you, because misusing one word in certain circles in the community can mean a totally different thing. And so we realized really quickly that we couldn't rely on Google Translate if we were going to be getting the same message out to the entire community. And so we had to be sensitive to that. We hired a full-time language and communications access manager for the county to support this, because when COVID originally hit, and still to this day, we see some real disproportionality in terms of infection rates. And so the messaging to some of the culturally diverse communities in the county became so much more important than a nice to have. It literally, in some cases, we saw as potentially having the impact of saving lives. And so making that resource available and investing in making sure that we had a language access communications manager from the very beginning of this was very, very important to us. During COVID, we created Spanish language texting alerts and a Spanish blog for people to go to. And it's really taken off, because, you refer people who speak only one language to a place where they're seeing everything in their language. And officially on a government website that's trusted has such a tremendous value to us, and has really helped us tremendously. We also launched a Spanish Facebook and Twitter accounts, which are one of the few localities in the entire country to have all Spanish social media pages for the whole locality. And so we really ramped this up during COVID, but we're not going to let off on this. COVID, we all pray, comes to an end sooner rather than later, but we're not going to take these tools down. We're going to use them to message out so many other important things about local government now that we have engaged a community and local government that maybe if it weren't for a pandemic, might not have really thought about their local government as a critical source of information. And so we're going to continue, with these. And, you can't do this in every language, unfortunately, just from a resource standpoint. So we went and found the top 7 languages in the county and really focused on those. We have over 100 different dialects spoken in the county, and we knew from the beginning that we needed to focus on, where the real population was and do those really well, instead of a scattershot trying to accommodate all of those different languages. In closing, I think some tips for VACO members is that, to be successful, you don't have to be viral. Sometimes we look at what's gone viral and fixate on that. And that's a fleeting moment. You don't become a reliable long-term source of information because of one viral moment. You become a long-term vital source of information because of the quality of your content, and people see value in going back and looking at those communications when they come out, not once, but expecting them with regularity and expecting a certain format and being able to scan through it easily and get the information that you need. Really important to be concise and straightforward. Sometimes this is hard for us. We know so much about what's happening in our county or jurisdiction, and we want to share everything. And to us, everything is important, right? I mean, we invest a lot of time and energy and effort into these things. But we need to remember that for most residents who are opening these, they want really a concise and straightforward message. They don't need every detail and the entire history behind something. They just are working in real time. And don't be afraid to be repetitive. I said many voices, same message earlier. That was embedded in my mind many years ago. The more repetitive you can be, the better, because when people hear mixed messages, they hear two different county agencies or two different county elected officials saying two different things, just creates confusion in a world right now where people are already stressed out, looking for reliable information, and where frankly they're bombarded sometimes by non-reliable information, by all different sorts of media and individuals. And so we've tried to be as repetitive as we can, kind of drill concepts into people's heads and make sure that they know that at the end of the day, Fairfax County, and particularly the chairman's office, can be a source of very reliable information that you can take to the bank. And if you've heard it 5, 6, 7 times, sometimes people say it takes 10 or more times to hear something before somebody actually grasps it and understands it. And so sometimes it's frustrating for me because I'm reading kind of the same things and say sometimes, why are we putting this out again? But like so many things with COVID, an example is wearing masks. I mean, how many times have we heard that? At a certain point in time, you just read over it. Some people need to hear that 2 or 3 times. Some people can hear it 100 times before it really sinks in. And so for some of the things we've been dealing with, we wanted to be repetitive in our messaging. And the last thing I would say is while we're doing this, kind of talking about how we've communicated during the pandemic, I would encourage everyone to take advantage of this opportunity to take that communication once COVID is over and communicate like that about everything that we're doing in the county. Because this may be a once in a lifetime opportunity, at least I'm seeing it that way, to have a captive audience of people who regularly come to us to get good information. And we want to keep them doing that. You know, when this is over, we want to keep them engaged and keep that momentum going. And so this has certainly been a challenging time, no doubt about it, but the power of information can't be underestimated. You know, we may spend more time in the messaging things that I've talked about in this presentation than we do in the mechanical workings of county government. It's that important to get the messaging out to people and to make sure that your community understands that your local government has command of a situation, is reliable and trustworthy, and there to help you. And I think we've achieved so many of those things in the last couple of months. And so with that, I thank you for giving me a few moments to share what we've been doing here, and hopefully some folks find it helpful.
Thank you, Chairman McKay. That was some good stuff about external communications with constituents. Up next is William McCarty, who will speak about how he used social media to communicate with his community. Supervisor McCarty, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gage. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to share on this platform. One of the things that's been very interesting, particularly during the pandemic, is communication. And as one of my distinguished colleagues just had talked about, communication has become critical. It's become very vital. And we are always looking for ways to reach into our community. So I want to talk just for a few moments about social media and how it can be used as a positive tool in troubling times. Now, for me particularly, I've been using social media for several years to communicate with constituents. Just as an example, or to think about, social media usage in the United States, the average adult today spends over 38 minutes a day just kind of browsing social media. The 16 to 24-year-olds do a little bit more, but internet users in 2019 spent 2 hours and 22 minutes a day on some type of socially networking site. So what that tells us is that people are out there on social media. Now, for us, particularly in Isle of Wight County, I use a combination of several different social media venues. One is a program or a venue called Nextdoor. And in Isle of Wight, the different neighborhoods that we have in subdivisions have signed on to that service. And so I'm linked into each of those, particularly in my district, and have encouraged our other supervisors to do the same, where you interact with that particular neighborhood. You're able to give them updates, answer questions on their particular development. Right now, just on the Facebook sites that I'm connected to within our community, I'm in contact with over 40,000 people that are subscribing to those sites. Our population is right around 38,000, so there may be some that are maybe outside the county. But here's a couple of things that it does. It opens up a public dialogue. Now, I know that's dangerous, and don't get scared of public dialogue, because there's a lot of misinformation that is out there. I know social media a lot of times is used as a very dangerous weapon in certain places, but it has proved for us to be a very valuable tool, whether it's weather updates, which we just sent out one today, weather updates, emergency updates, updates on public projects, road projects, queuing the public in on when a development is coming online. It is very crucial to have this piece out there because not everyone subscribes to the newspaper anymore that's delivered to them. They're on social media. It is on their phone. It is on their tablet. It's on their computer. Even in some of the vehicles today that can actually read you your social media feed while you're driving down the road. I've not tried that one yet, but I hear it's pretty interesting. So a couple of things with social media that we have kind of brought certain platforms together. We have done Zoom interviews. We have done WebEx interviews. We have integrated those both on social media in Facebook, on YouTube, with Twitter. We have more in our locality response on Facebook and Instagram than we do actually on Twitter. Every locality is going to be different, but it's very important for elected leaders to stay in communications with their constituents. They want you to be visible. They want you to be accessible. And there are a lot of tools that kind of reach into social media. I want to talk just a moment about surveys. We utilize surveys in conjunction with social media quite regularly. We use two platforms, SurveyMonkey and JotForms. It's not a commercial for them, but they are critical in conjunction with our social media to be able to gain the input from our citizens. Let's face it, not everybody can make a public meeting, a public hearing. They're situated in such a way that we try to make allowance, and it's later in the evening. 6 o'clock is when our public hearings always begin, but not everybody can get out there. And so we stream our public hearings and all of our meetings on social media as well. And literally during the meetings, during different subjects, I watch the feed to see if there are any questions from people in the public and try to get their input built into our conversation. So social media is a big deal. Now, one of the downfalls to social media is the amount of misinformation that oftentimes gets thrown out there. I'll give you an example. VDOT is doing some road improvements right now on Route 17 that runs through our county. It's a main thoroughfare here. And the word got out that it was a major apartment complex that the Board of Supervisors voted on at a meeting that was not publicized. Of course, none of that was true, but the point was it was out there on some of our social media sites. Because we are connected on those social media sites, we were actually able to see that and put out the correct information. Misinformation on social media is very dangerous, and it creates public opinion, influences public opinion, particularly at our local level. So it's very important that we have a social media presence. One of the most comical ones, and I say it now, it wasn't comical at the time, was someone had put on social media and they took pictures of contracting equipment that was in Carrollton, and they were fixing a gas line. That's what was taking place. But the citizen put out there that William McCarty, the Newport District Supervisor, was putting a toll for the James River Bridge. Now, I know that's completely absurd because we don't have that type of authority, but it was on social media. And because people saw it, they thought, well, it must be true. And so it's important to have that presence on social media. Some of the studies recently showed that a person throughout their entire life is going to spend approximately 1 year and 10 months on YouTube. They're going to spend about 18 days on Twitter. They're going to spend about 1 year and 7 months on Facebook. They're going to spend 1 year and 2 months on Snapchat. And then they're going to spend about 8 months on Instagram throughout the course of a person's life. That's a lot of time and influence that social media has on our citizens. So it's very important to be engaged in social media. There are a lot of, for instance, Carrollton 411 that is in our locality. I'm on the trash and treasure sites. I'm on the different communities within Carrollton, all of their sites. I've got my own Facebook pages and social media pages, as well as being connected to some of the other, like our Chamber of Commerce and some of our business development pages. Now, why is all that important? Because it's connectivity. Yes, it requires time in monitoring it. The other day, I spent 2.5 hours answering developmental questions on social media, literally live with citizens in real time. And that was very valuable to the citizens. Now, that's a lot of time to be on social media, but it answered a lot of their questions. So some of the things that are good to put on social media, of course, weather, traffic updates, emergency happenings, any project updates that you have, county news, and anything going on in the county, linking them to our digital newsletter has been very, very popular for us. Pandemic updates, as we've been going in and out of different things here with the health district, and then allowing the public to input. So I want to encourage you, don't be afraid of social media. I know it's a rabbit hole for some. I know it can suck you in, but if you can set aside time to connect with your constituents on social media, it will produce a valuable result to you, to your county, and to your citizens as well, as you foster that interaction. We are now moving into some virtual town halls and marrying Zoom and WebEx with some of the social media platforms to be able to engage our citizens on another level. So it's very exciting, but it's also very challenging. Don't be afraid of social media. It will only produce good results if you manage it well. The best tool in the wrong hands can be destructive, but the best tool in the right hands can be very productive and informative. So use it. You have good hands. You've been elected by your citizens to serve and to communicate with them. Use it wisely, communicate with them, and embrace your citizens that way. Right now, folks aren't apt to come to public meetings, but it will pay dividends throughout your community as you connect in social media. So don't be afraid of it. If you don't have it, sign up and begin using it. Your constituents are waiting for you. I promise you, if you don't find them, they will find you, and the journey will be great. So Gage, you guys, thanks again for the opportunity just to share. Social media is a big part of our culture today. Thanks.
Thank you, Supervisor McCarty. You're right. Social media is an important and effective tool when used correctly. I'm going to set up for our next speaker, Dr. Joseph Casey, who will talk about internal communications. Give me 1 second here. Right here, and I'm going to get it to full screen, and then it's all yours, Dr. Casey.
Well, thank you, and I greatly appreciate the two speakers before me. You know, as part of being a co-presenter, you also learn and listen as you go forth. So again, thanks for the information and really different geographic perspectives of the state, but showing that we're all in the same boat. You know, just to not be redundant, but I'll try and skip through certain things, but you know, the accurate sources of information are just so important. You know, early on, you know, we had some issues, and I'll start off by saying the first slide you see is a T-shirt I got from our Chesterfield Education Foundation as a fundraiser, and again, just showing community spirit in these times, and fundraising, quite frankly, for viable and important institutions is important. I'll give a side note, that was their concept for the shirt. I have another one they're working on that I think I find humorous, but I thought one day it'd be really good to have a shirt that says in very small font, if you can read this, you're standing too close to me. So, but we'll see how they go with that one. But inside track for those who want to make money on the side. Anyhow, for the next slide there, the early priority slide, just as a side note, I'm the church sign guy. This isn't my church. Our church, unfortunately, has been closed since the pandemic started. But I just couldn't help but recognize that, you know, even the spirit of churches, you have to kind of just realize we're all in the same boat, trying to figure this out, trying to get through it. But with these internal lines of communication, again, these information sources in the beginnings were just all over the place. As those that mentioned before, whether it's the internet or social media, somebody says 3 times in a row the information. When it's false, people believe, you know, so, you know, sometimes you have to say it 3 times or 5 times in the factual manner for them to actually begin thinking differently. I'm also amazed just our lack of a society of statistics and knowledge, quite frankly. I can't tell you how many times I've had to give a conversation to someone about, it starts like this: when do you think the total cases are going to be less? And I said, well, that's a cumulative number. And they're like, well, what does that mean? I was like, well, cumulative never comes down. It only stays where it is and only can get higher. And they looked at me as if, what are you talking about? These total cases have to be lower sometime. But anyhow, I don't know if you all are in the same boat, but you realize you have to educate one person at a time, and that is a good day. The first thing you do with these information sources, you push them out, you try and give the facts, but you also set the undertone and theme that ensuring the workforce is healthy and safety is your first priority. And by default, therefore, the customer that we're serving is as well. And we do not want to put anyone in harm's way. We try to have as many lines of communication with the health department, and I don't know how the other areas are, but we're the largest locality that's in a shared district, meaning the health department is not specific to Chesterfield. We share it with 2 other localities. So it's very hard to get locality only information from a health district. Just like many may say across the state, they have a great relationship with their own health district, but it's the state Virginia Department of Health that seems to be a barrier to information and details. I can't find out or know when there's outbreaks occurring. I can't tell you how many times I see something on the news first for a long-term care facility that exists in Chesterfield that even our fire EMS is not aware of. And again, we need to work through that legislatively if need be, but I think a lot of it is just old-fashioned regulatory constraints for, again, to respect the fact that these localities have fire and EMS departments. We're not interested in names or addresses. We're just interested in data on how best to prepare for something that could be going from bad to worse. I know someone mentioned the Spanish speaking and other language speaking residents. And again, first and foremost, you really have to work with them when you have the community-based testings, because I still remember when the state National Guard or federal National Guard showed up for the first one, all in their federal uniforms and Army fatigues. And again, our liaison to that community said, you are not going to get the Hispanic community out if you're wearing military garb. And they didn't understand what we were saying. So it just shows you that local frontline perspectives that we all have need to be listened to by state and federal resources whenever and wherever possible. The term essential employee, if you asked me a year ago today what an essential employee would be, I would say, well, those are the people you got to call in when it's a hurricane, blizzard, natural disaster. If you ask me today what an essential employee is, it's going to be a lot longer description, because it is fascinating of the people that you really need by your side, the people you need to come in, the people you need to be on call. Perhaps that essential employee, you never see them. They're working from their couch on the darkest day during this pandemic, being the most productive worker. So we're figuring all of that out and trying to clarify it. Again, just in light of it, we're redebating what is a closing in the future, quite frankly, even during natural disasters. Because again, if everybody has a laptop at home or can pivot, that's not a first responder in the public safety fields, you may not necessarily need to close, quite frankly, as often or open as late if, again, the employee is putting in their 40 hours a week. I'm going to talk a little bit more on the next slide about the tech resources, but the PPE, again, we all tried to chase it. We all thought we had great relationships with our vendors until, and we had actually a great order coming in just naturally on PPE. And it's nothing worse than a vendor you've been doing business with for 10 years that, has been your primary fire EMS vendor for PPE saying, sorry, but some state official or federal official stole your goods from the warehouse under some, order. And then, you knock on the state or federal door and they're like, well, we don't have it. So needless to say, that month of March through early April was stressful to so many. Next slide, please. As we transition to the telework, one of the things we had to do, and this is a good regional topic, we, as a region, came up with a similar statement because, again, a lot of our customers and businesses and their employees or volunteers, we all work and commute across our lines. And we didn't want to have 4 messages as far as what we were communicating out. Those are the big 4 localities of the region. So we came up with a simple big font title that we are open with reduced operations. And again, there may be subtle differences below that in the small print, but it gave the mindset that we were going to try and stay open for their needs, but we are not necessarily the same as we were yesterday. But again, I think that was a great regional collaborative moment. It really set the tone for us to have recurring, almost daily discussions amongst my peers, elected officials to elected officials, and it goes without saying, our emergency operations teams. From our human resource and tech division, we basically, had in very few employees taking advantage of teleworking before. We kind of viewed a teleworker as a luxury. The policies that we had were so restricted that when I read them now, I was like, what century were they written in? If you had a child at home, you were like, there is no way you can work if there's a child in your household. Therefore, you have to come to work, or you're not going to get paid. So we have basically rewritten all of our policies from the opposite perspective, that we trust and value an employee. We trust and value that they're going to give us 40 hours worth of work. If they have a child in the house, if they have to walk a dog, we're not going to get into the micromanagement. We're going to evaluate you on productivity. In retrospect, there's sometimes people who come to work that are less productive because, there's Mrs. Smith who goes around the office and has a half-hour conversation with everybody 10 times over. So we don't have Mrs. Smith doing that. At least I'm not aware of that. So we really, right-sized it all out. We actually even said, work your best 40 hours. So if you're having to help a child during the day in a morning virtual learning class, then, if you want to work from 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. at night, if that works best for you, if you want to work weekends, we don't care as long as a customer can be served. So work it out amongst your coworkers. We want to have, the lines open per se, 8:30 to 5 every day, phone lines or email type channels. But again, if you can work it out and it works well for you and you can be better at what you do, then by all means, do it. It's interesting. I've only gotten one complaint so far, and that was actually from a citizen who said he was bothered that he thought I was working my employees too hard because he sent some message to our workforce or an employee at 10 p.m. through some portal that he wasn't normally expecting a response back until the next morning. And that employee around 11 p.m. responded, and because that's when the employee felt comfortable to work. And so, so once I explained it to him, he was just amazed that, again, in his mindset, we were private sector-esque. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not. I do take it as a compliment, though. I know we've all been involved for the telework too. We were fortunate. We replaced about 20% of our laptops every year, and we had about 200 laptops going through a replacement program already. Well, we just basically froze them and gave those 200 laptops to people who never had a laptop before. So timing worked to our advantage. Basically, we then updated another 800 computers, again, to enable the teleworking world. And then, it's the infamous thing. Each of us may have our own products. We had actually Microsoft Teams in 2019. I did not use Microsoft Teams probably until March 12th, 2020. Probably I remember that day in infamy. But having said that, we are basically using that product over and over, but out of respect for anyone else I get invited to meetings to, that's not necessarily the platforms they use. And I will tell you, I've actually had one day where I went from a Teams meeting to Zoom to WebEx to GoToMeeting to Google Meet and to Click a Meeting. And I think my computer at the end of the day just, sighed, as far as all these platforms. And you can see on the bottom right picture I have there, sometimes you just have to have some fun in these meetings and the backgrounds that people have. So that Brady Bunch theme, I just couldn't resist it when I saw it for one of the meetings I was in. But again, there's a time and place for appropriate backgrounds. We actually created an array of county scenery and sites, actually some self-promotion of backgrounds that our workforce is using, so much so that citizens and businesses have asked for those same backgrounds. So there's a little marketing involved now for certain people to do that. And I would have never have thought about that. I myself, I realized in March when I was coming to work for a week straight, and again, for whatever reasons, I don't know how you all are, but when I am on a conference call, I close my door because I just, I just don't want to have my noise spill out. I'm not sure what people are saying. And since we're not really trying to be as germ-free as possible, so we have all of our doors open, so we're not even touching handles. So I basically was coming in for a week straight, walk into my office, closing the door and having about 8 straight 1-hour type meetings, maybe more. And I was like, at some point, I was like, I don't even need to be here. And you know, there's no mail coming in. Everything is PDF'd, emailed. So none of the old school email. We got all the virtual e-signatures and things of that nature. And people were saying, you know, the people, and it's just the role of a county administrator again, and again, maybe the elected officials see and sense that too, that they felt like they had to be here because I was coming here. And it was stressing them out during the thick of the pandemic early on. So I started to work from home once in a while, or at least if I had virtual meetings back to back to back, I would start at home, and got tired of looking at a screen, quite frankly. And so I started walking until I realized that, you know, if you walk about 3 miles an hour and you have about 7 straight meetings, you know, your legs are tired at the end of the day. So it's kind of fascinating. I like to say my economic indicator of a recession is when I lose 10 pounds, then the economy returns. So some inside information, I'm down about 8 pounds. So I think we're almost done with this thing. From a staff perspective on the next slide there, you know, I have a byline I use really for my Gmail, not my work one, but it really fits the tone of this. And it says, you know, nobody cares. It's a Teddy Roosevelt quote. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And again, I apply that pretty much for everything I do. And, you know, we really, really needed to figure out, how do you value staff? I'm one of those people, I like to walk around. I like to say hi. You know, I like to visit the furthest, you know, workstation, whether it's a fire station or some convenience center, so that I can say hi to all the workers. And, you know, I had it almost down to an art. And, you know, those are the employees that really respect you, that you take time out of your day and drive almost an hour commute back and forth sometimes to see them. So anyhow, not being able to do that, because again, you know, we're trying not to have unnecessary meetings per se. You know, you have to figure out, how do you pivot to something that's a communicative manner? Very difficult. You know, you can create some of the videos, you can create some of the newsletters, and we create some specialty products. You know, we had board members involved, you know, nice stories to share. But one thing that seemed to resonate that I didn't sense was I started writing a weekly message, and it was just an email. So it wasn't anything fancy, no glitzy product video with it. But it was really just me talking from my heart and soul about, you know, how this is affecting me personally. How's it affecting my family? How's it affecting my 81-year-old mother, you know, that we're trying to keep safe and afar? And, you know, just my observations and stories. And people did not realize that a county administrator is a human being, you know, that has a heart, you know. So I felt like, you know, the line on Wizard of Oz maybe, or something. And that was courage. It was the Tin Man that needed the heart. I'm sorry, I didn't want to throw I think I have courage. I already had that. Anyhow, it's just one of those things. People don't realize that you know, I am no different than they are. You know, my wife, who's a school teacher, you know, put in the virtual mode in the beginning. She was just worn down every day. So I just passed that along, because I learned a lot about just the importance of having communications and having these employees. I'll send out a weekly email and I'll get 50 people sending me messages back of their own stories, their perspectives. And you know, I almost have these pen pal relationships. Some of them are people I've never even met that I view as a friend now, more than just a coworker. So it's very interesting, and I want to figure out how to keep that going post all of this. You know, we had to go through the tough things in the very beginning, just as businesses and other governments did. You know, right in March, we realized that there were certain parts in our reduced operations that were not opening. We redeployed as many people as possible. You know, we had the adage, you know, as long as you could work 40 hours a week, then you're fine. But this is not a look busy. This is a be busy moment in government. And so we had we had 600 plus workers that we furloughed for 6 months, covered their employee health insurance. Mostly they were part-time people. They were actually having negative paychecks because they were having some health insurance payments, you know, deductions with a $0 paycheck. So we covered their side of health insurance for 6 months, but we just didn't have any work for them to do. And 6 months later, you know, about 200 plus have come back. We have another 100 or so with an extended furlough. Those are some of our library, parks, and rec people that are on the verge of more fully operating. But 200 other people found other jobs, or you know, after the $600 extra special retirement went. You can switch to the communicating with elected officials. Again, you know, I have 5 board members, and I treat them all the same. And, we try to have as many calls with the chair and vice chair. We start with that. That's our protocols in Chesterfield, at least. We try to have calls with our state delegation. Amazingly, we set up like a weekly call with them in the beginning, and it went then to every 2 weeks and then to a monthly call. But, we have never had such better attendance from our state delegation because they didn't know the local stories. They didn't know the frontline stories. And you realize the absence of that information is a hindrance to their abilities to do their job. And I can have a whole conversation about that on so many other topics of a state delegate elected official. But anyhow, we created different products for them to use, the 5 board members, the state delegation. We ran a lot of interference. There's a lot of people who couldn't get access to the Virginia Employment Commission, VEC. I mean, the unemployment lines and claims and systems. So we had to run some interference with that. We had to work with the state actually to get a site set up in Chesterfield. 350,000 people here. I think we had over 16,000 on continuing claims at one point. Not one office in all of Chesterfield County. So they were all helpful for that. But again, some of those things you can't turn quickly. I created a little product that I just started doing a daily email to the board of the COVID econ update. And, some people heard about it internally as staff, so I started sharing with it. Other lower levels of staff who might have been, the person in charge of our feeding programs and social services heard about it, wanted to be apprised of it. And I think I even sent one to Dean at Baco. But I think I have like 150, 200 people sign up for this product. And all it is just various little tidbits. I'm the middleman of all information. So I get parts and pieces and frontline perspectives about what COVID is, what are certain statistics, what are certain economic indicators, what are some initiatives being done. It's just the facts. I'm not here it's not propaganda, but it's just amazing how many business and community leaders are unaware of all the facets of how this pandemic is affecting life around us. It's through these types of emails and programs too that we're able to really push ourselves and think innovatively. And again, the day that the governor announced the abilities to have you have outdoor dining, allowing up to your capacity, but still be spatial, we actually that day created a very special program where we said, go out into your parking lots, go out into your sidewalks, set up a perimeter that's an ABC zone. And we worked with Travis Hill, the director at ABC, saying, Travis, if I can get these people to expand out and replicate a safe capacity that actually would equal what their indoor capacity otherwise was, they may, make it. And to the state's ABC credit, within 24 hours, he got back and said, if you give like a permit process that you're okay and the landlord's okay, we will do our best to expedite it. And that's been one of the best things that's happened, because we just have the business has to do like 3 clicks of a button. They get a permit self-issued to them. And they send that to the state, and within hours, they were able to set up shop outside. It works so well that I'm getting a lot of people saying that's how rezoning should be, but we're not up to that yet. Having said that, these innovative practices, again, I just love the mindset of an employee who's able to think. And, it's the librarian who said, what? We don't really have to close our library. We can keep our doors closed, but people need access to the books. So if we can work out a way where they can order online, and can we do curbside pickup just like someone's doing curbside pickup for a restaurant? And we're like, of course you can. And we did not know how popular that would be. So we started programs like that. If you can skip to the next slide. Again, as I'm ending this up here, I just wanted to share some tips. That Venn diagram on the right-hand side, I came across it once, and it does make me laugh, because I do think we're all in the me factor. And if you have a hard time seeing it, the top circle, it says people taking coronavirus seriously. Some are very serious about it. Some are not serious. So it's that whole spectrum of that circle. The bottom left is people very concerned about impending economic devastation. Again, there's a spectrum of that as well. And then the bottom right is people worried about expansion of authoritarian government policy. So I think we're all, as localities, in the me part of that circle. And that me is a 24/7. I do think, again, teleworking is here to stay. I think that's actually very interesting what's happening. And again, from the other geographic areas of the region, I think you may be amazed of how many people you have living in your community every day that may have commuted outside of it. These are your citizens that are now 24/7 people. And their job was once listed where they went to. And so, quote unquote, as far as your employees or your workforce base in the private sector was probably understated by this talent that was being exported out. So we're actually working with VEC because we, at least in Chesterfield, we have so many teleworkers now that are waking up and spending time here. We have people who've moved away from the New York cities and other areas and are setting shop up here, but their job is still listed at headquarters. And again, I think VEC or some state statistic needs to recognize the fact that somebody's 24/7 in your locality. You should count that as a job in your locality because they are consuming some goods and services, quote unquote, much more often than they otherwise would if they had been outside your county during those hours. The last thing I'll just leave with is, again, as an employer, I'm trying to be mindful of an employee's work life, but also personal life, without getting into their privacy. But the mental health and the stress and the anguish, not necessarily what they are doing as part of their job. That goes without saying. We can see that, and we could have seen that pre-pandemic. But it's the employee who has an 80-year-old parent who may have just gotten diagnosed with COVID. It's the friend, family. It's all this. It's the watching of the news all day long that is just doing that to them. So I'll leave one last quote that I have, and that is Margaret Wheatley. I always like this one, but she says, "There is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about." And that's where I'm just humbled by seeing what people are doing. I didn't even know that our library, let people check out sewing machines. We have an inventory of sewing machines. You can come to the library and check them out. We had this volunteer group check them all out, and they just sat around in a spatial room and made masks for 8 hours a day when nobody could get masks. And they were just trying to give them out to anybody. No business to it. They got some donations for the cloth, but they were free labor. And to them, that's how they dealt with the pandemic. So I'll leave it at that, but hopefully that's a quick summary of the Chesterfield perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Casey. That was awesome. If you all wouldn't mind, I just have a couple of questions, and let's use the same batting order as the Chairman McKay first, and then Supervisor McCarty, and then Dr. Casey. So, with virtually no playbook or manual on how to communicate during a pandemic, what did you rely on? Skills, philosophy, internal process to guide you. What did you fall back on to guide you when everything was so confusing? Chairman McKay, would you start?
Yeah, sure. So, it's a great question. And I think a lot of us had to work to find that. I don't think anybody instinctively just had that, given the situation we were in. What I found is we kind of developed a playbook as we went and got better. Each day that went by, I can remember the first press conference of the first 2 positive cases in Fairfax City in March. And our playbook there was to calm everyone down and to, have a strong message of confidence out there. And of course, as this thing kept getting larger and larger and larger, we kind of changed our playbook to make sure that we were giving people the real facts that were helpful to them. And from a strategic standpoint, we're a big county government, and we could rely on so many specialists in all these different departments. And I felt like my job at the beginning of this was to take the best components of information from a lot of different county agencies and condense them down into one messaging tool. And so what was the health department saying? What was the permit office saying? What was the police department saying? We have all those folks who are experts in their field, and not all of us should be experts in our field. And so I always remind myself in local government, our job really in a lot of ways is to know a little bit about a lot of things and not necessarily a lot about one thing. And, so my philosophy on this was take the best talent we had in the county of the people who knew what they were talking about. With regard to health, clearly the health statistics and guidelines, I wasn't going to make those up. I was going to pull them off the shelf, put them in my newsletter as a reliable source of information. So I think what guided me the most was relying on the specialist And our job was really to put that together in one cohesive message coming from the chairman's office so that the community had confidence that the county had this thing under control. And that's probably the best thing I can offer people is take your talented county employees who know these issues so well and just repackage their message into yours instead of creating a whole new message.
Supervisor McCarty, would you like to respond?
Sure. You know, one of the things, particularly with social media, when the county offices and everything started closing and different places started responding to the pandemic, social media actually kept us open 24 hours a day. And what I mean by that is it has allowed citizens to stay in contact. And I'll just speak for me particularly. Now, the difficult side of it is, you know, sometimes citizens would want you to release data that you didn't have, health information that even if you did have it, you couldn't produce or put out there publicly because of HIPAA laws and things like that. But it allowed citizens to be in connectivity with their local elected leaders. For some, we put too much information out there. For others, we didn't do enough. And so, you know, and I found that as a pastor in a church as well, or of a church as well, sometimes, well, you can't please everybody all the time, but, you know, some you've done great, you've put out enough information, others not so much. So it's balancing that and trying to respond to the communication. So we believe that social media helped us to stay accessible to our citizen when the brick and mortar buildings were shut down.
So I'll just simply say, you know, one of the things I've learned is, you know, I'm listening more than talking. You know, it's my mother's old adage: you got two ears, one mouth. And I'm also probably speaking in greater tones of various emotions. You know, I have much more empathetic in tone. I'm much more, you know, stern or upset. But it's the range of emotions I think the people I'm talking to are also feeling. And, you know, you can run the fault, at least in my position, of just like making everything seem calm, cool, and collected almost too often or to a fault. And again, I try and maintain the professionalism, of course, but I'm also like recognizing that, you know, we are all in this together, and there is no org chart in trying to figure this out necessarily. If someone in the bottom right corner of the org chart has the idea to make someone's day better, an employee or customer, then that box is on top that day.
Thank you. Dean, did you have something to say or add?
Gage, I just really wanted to thank you all for being on this webinar for our members. But one of the questions I had was really going back to each of your all's discussion about the messaging. I know Chairman McKay, you were focused on the newsletter as being the top priority, and Mr. McCarty talking about the social media piece. And Dr. Casey, along with the internal communications that you've been involved with, are all, you know, when you started all these processes, I know for me, for instance, when I started doing letter writing and doing things like that, you started out with, I'm used to communicating with certain groups, and your messaging is really based on your audience into certain groups. But your all's with social media and with the newsletter and with the internal communications going out beyond the internal group, how have you had to really look at your audience and revise what you're writing to get it out to the masses so that many people can understand? In other words, you know, simple and concise. How are you being simple and concise, and how have you had to perfect that over the last several months?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dean, and I think it's an important one because you know, I will characterize my newsletter list before COVID as people that we know are good government people. You know, there are citizens that are always on top of what's happening on the county, And they're the people, they're our frequent flyers at public hearings, they're HOA presidents, they're the type A engaged people in county government. And what we quickly realized is that our newsletter was turning into a tool that was providing for some people very important, almost clinically medical advice about what to do during a pandemic. And so we had to go from a lot of information about some topics, like we might have had in a past newsletter, we might have dedicated 2 to 3 pages to a stormwater project that we just did. And we knew that our audience now wanted to pick right off the top, what are the most important things I've got to know about COVID right now, because this could be in some people's minds a life and death situation. And so we had to condense down, put the most important thing right at the top and put it in very simple terms. And I mentioned earlier about the language challenges. One of the keys to our simple messaging too is to try to appeal to a lot of people who may have challenges with English. And so keeping it simple, keeping it concise at a time when maybe you couldn't have translated everything into a million different languages. So we shifted from what I would consider to be a full-fledged description about individual projects into a newsletter that had to be short and succinct, and realize that you're reaching a totally different audience than your original one, and that those good government people had also shifted in their minds. The most passionate environmentalist became someone who all of a sudden was interested in where they could get a face mask. So, my audience, sometimes the audience changed. A lot of times it didn't, but we really had to change the way we messaged folks. And the last thing I'll say is people's bandwidth to read a newsletter every single day that has pages of information about a stormwater facility is a very limited number of people in Fairfax County that will do that. And when we shifted to how fast this was moving and saying we had to communicate every day, we knew that people would stop opening this if they were getting 8 pages about a stormwater pond every day. And so in order for it to continue to be relevant, it had to be succinct because we were sending them out every single day.
Supervisor?
Yeah, some great points there by Chairman McKay. One of the things that I've found is because you have the different needs of folks, some wanting more detail, some wanting things more succinct or concise, they want some bulleted points, is we've offered a couple of things. Number one, the opportunity, if something is not as detailed as they want, they can ask for more information, or the long form, so to speak. The other challenge that we ran into is that written communication oftentimes is left to be interpreted by the tone of the reader. And so we've incorporated videos on our social media sites with some of the concise information so that there's less opportunity for the message to be lost in an interpretation that someone may have in a moment over frustration over a project, frustration over the pandemic, because that can happen. And this is those are things that we did before COVID hit. So I think it's important not just to have the written communication, the newsletter, the social media presence with updates, but also giving videos, short videos. They don't have to be long, where people can actually hear you, see you, and not just be continually subjected to something written. But it was a great question.
Oh, Dr. Casey, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
So I'll just say 3 things. We worked as a region together on some critical messaging so that we were all, again, not confusing each other with terms and again, we got a lot of accolades that they think regional cooperation in this area is better than ever in a pandemic, which again, that was a natural barrier. So, we even had it early on in March, a joint press conference of the mayor of Richmond and the board chairs of the regional localities here with the health directors of all the districts. So just that visual, and again, that was before we needed to be even more spatial and more safer, but it was like the beginnings that we're all in this together, and we still point to that as a beacon. The second thing is, we didn't talk at all today about we talk about pandemics and economic issues, but I will say the messaging and how you message when it came to some of the civil unrest that occurred was all of a sudden trumped both of those other categories by far. And so, even my own personal messages, I pass those messages around in draft form to far greater people than I ever would before, because it just has to be, it can't be misinterpreted, because, it's all how the reader reads something sometimes, and what could be an emotional reader. So I value that. And the people I shared it with, again, who are not normally in my chain of draft modes, were just so appreciative that they felt like they were valued to give their lens and perspective. And that worked very, very well on many fronts. And I think Chairman McKay brought up, again, these citizens who are traditionally the ones that are our visual constituents. We switched to a lot of online portal comments, for public hearings, citizen comments at board meetings. We did not foresee how many people actually preferred not coming to a board meeting, and it moderated the opinion by far. And again, in retrospect, I even laugh when I think about it. What were we thinking that somebody would think that they should give up their Wednesday night, sit through 5 hours of whatever's in front of them, not understanding one piece of it, to have 3 minutes of fame, and then still not really clear exactly if anyone heard what they said? Because sometimes they're raising questions and comments that there is no answer at that moment for, versus, a week before the agenda, they're actually able to upload questions and comments on a zoning case or an unscheduled matter. So we're coming to the meeting with the answers in hand. So we're presenting basically the presentation to address those concerns. So we're not going back. That's another element we're not going back on. Now, having said that, our regular customers, this is to their dismay, and that's a topic for another day.
Gage, let me add one last thing. I've read all your all's publications, and Mr. McCarty watched all the videos and the social media pieces. And 2020 has been a tough year. Lots of down stuff, with the pandemic, people working from homes, restaurants closing, and all those kind of things. But I've got to really applaud you all three of you all, on your messaging. It has been positive. I mean, it really has been positive, and it's and I think as a regular citizen, it's giving all of us something to look beyond this, knowing that this is going to end sometime. And I do think that positive message has been very important to your constituents. So that being said, Gage, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, you know what? That's a positive note to end on. So I'd like to thank all three of you for taking time and sharing your experiences with our members. I've enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it as well. So we'll sign off here. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the annual conference. Take care.